The sun was low and golden, casting long shadows across the perfect lawns and trimmed hedges of Rosewood Lane, the kind of neighborhood where porch swings creaked gently, sprinklers hissed rhythmically, and everything looked clean, polished, and quiet. But too quiet, the kind of quiet that watches you, judges you. Marcus walked alone down the sidewalk, his hoodie unzipped, his school backpack slung lazily over one shoulder, headphones in, eyes on the cracked pavement, unaware that every step he took was already being measured by people peeking through curtains and blinds. The music in his ears thumped steady, but outside the tension vibrated differently. Sideways glances from dog walkers, a woman gripping her child's hand tighter as he passed, a neighbor pausing mid-rake to stare, his knuckles whitening around the wooden handle. Marcus didn't look up. He didn't see the text messages being sent, the vague phrases, "There's someone walking around, doesn't look familiar, looks like trouble. Should I call someone?" As if his existence needed an explanation. He had walked this way before, a dozen times, but that didn't matter today. Today, the air felt heavier, suspicious. Today, someone had already decided that Marcus didn't belong, and that someone had a badge. The squad car rolled up slowly behind Marcus like a shadow with wheels, silent at first. Then a sudden squawk from the speaker broke through the rhythm in his headphones. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" He turned, confused, pulling one earbud out, blinking against the sun. The officer stepped out with a look that wasn't angry, wasn't even surprised. It was cold, rehearsed, the expression of a man who already knew how this story was supposed to go. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he asked flatly, hand resting on his belt like it was second nature. Marcus frowned, glancing around, unsure if the question was real. "Walking home," he said, his voice unsure but not weak. "From where?" the officer asked, taking a step closer, scanning him up and down as if his jeans were evidence and his skin a threat. "From school. You live around here?" "No, sir. Just passing through." The officer's eyebrows twitched upward, like that answer confirmed something. "Passing through," he repeated, drawing the words out like they were dangerous. "Funny. We've had a few calls about someone fitting your description, acting suspicious, looking into yards, pacing." Marcus swallowed hard. "I wasn't doing any of that." "No." The officer stepped forward again. "Mind if I see some ID?" Marcus hesitated, his hand twitching toward his pocket. "Slow," the officer barked, and his voice had changed. It was louder now, firmer, as if Marcus had done something wrong already. "Nice and slow." Marcus froze, terrified that the wrong move would turn this sidewalk into a crime scene. He pulled out his school ID, trembling. The officer took it without a word, glanced at it, then looked back at Marcus like the name printed there meant nothing. 17, huh? He muttered. "Big for 17. You play sports?" "No," Marcus said quietly. The officer mused. "You just look like someone who's always on the edge of something." Marcus had no idea what that meant, but it wasn't a compliment. "What's in the bag?" "Books," Marcus said, almost whispering now. "Can I see?" Before Marcus could answer, the officer already had the backpack halfway unzipped. He pulled out a math textbook, a half-eaten granola bar, and a spiral notebook. "You always carry this much?" Marcus nodded. "So you're a good kid?" Marcus nodded again. "Then why do you look so nervous?" The question landed like a trap. Marcus opened his mouth to answer, but nothing came out. How could he say the truth? That his hands were shaking because he'd seen too many videos that started like this. That every part of his body was screaming to stay still, be polite, survive? But the officer didn't wait. "You know," he said, glancing at the houses around them, "this is the kind of neighborhood where people work hard to feel safe. You understand that, right?" Marcus didn't respond. "You look like you've been somewhere you shouldn't be. I'm going to need you to stay right here while I run this ID." He didn't need to. It was a school ID with no barcode, but he walked back to the cruiser anyway. Marcus stood frozen, feeling the eyes from the windows again. Curtains twitching, blinds shifting. They weren't watching to help. They were watching to see what would happen next. And for the first time, Marcus realized something chilling. To them, he didn't look like a child. He looked like a warning. The cruiser door slammed shut with a hollow finality, and Marcus stood on the sidewalk like a figure caught in amber, completely still, body tense, breath shallow, as if any movement might trigger something irreversible. The officer sat inside the car, pretending to run the ID that wasn't connected to any system, his radio crackling with unrelated chatter, his eyes flicking up every few seconds to watch Marcus like a hawk tracking prey. Across the street, a woman with graying hair stepped onto her porch, holding a mug of coffee. She didn't wave, she didn't smile, she just stared, her mouth a thin line. Another man leaned against his mailbox, arms crossed, his phone in hand, camera clearly recording. Not to help, just in case. Just in case this boy did something worth sharing. Marcus felt the weight of it all pressed down on his chest like a hand. He wasn't a person anymore. He was a situation, a potential headline, a problem waiting to happen. "Step to the curb," the officer barked, exiting the cruiser again, now holding something in his hand. Marcus did as he was told. "Hands out. Turn around. I'm just going to pat you down. For my safety." The words "for my safety" rang like a cruel joke. For his safety? Marcus had done nothing. Said nothing. Was carrying nothing but a textbook and a granola bar. But he turned slowly, raising his hands, heart hammering. The pat-down was unnecessary and humiliating. The officer's hands moved roughly across his back, his sides, down his legs. "You nervous?" the officer asked, leaning close, voice just above a whisper. "Because nervous people usually have something to hide." Marcus stayed quiet. He didn't trust his voice not to shake. "You're awful quiet," the officer continued. "A little attitude wouldn't be out of character, though. You people like to mouth off when you feel cornered, right?" The words sank in like poison. You people. Not a slip. Not an accident. A message. Marcus bit the inside of his cheek, tasting blood, holding back every emotion that clawed at his throat. "Maybe next time, don't cut through this area," the officer said, stepping back, wiping his hands on his pants, like touching Marcus had left residue. "People pay too much to live here to have strangers walking through like they own it." He tossed the ID back like it was trash. "You're free to go." But Marcus couldn't move. His legs were still frozen, and his face burned, not with fear now, but with humiliation. The officer had reduced him to nothing, made him feel like a trespasser in his own skin. A few doors down, a child peeked from behind a screen door, watching him like he was a warning his parents had whispered about. And then came the voice that cut through the entire scene, deep and commanding, unmistakable in its authority. "What exactly do you think you're doing to my son?" The officer spun around, his entire posture shifting in an instant. From dominance to hesitation, from arrogance to rigid control. Standing at the end of the block, walking steadily toward them, was a tall man in full military uniform, chest full of ribbons, shoulders squared with years of command. General Anthony Reeves, Marcus's father, and he did not look confused. He looked ready for war. Let's pause for a brief moment. If you're still listening, let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. Have you ever experienced something like this in your own life or seen it happen to someone close to you? Your stories matter. We read every comment, and we value each one of you deeply. If this story speaks to you, consider subscribing so you don't miss what comes next. Now, we continue. The officer's entire demeanor fractured in the span of a breath. His hand, which had just been resting casually near his holster, now dropped to his side, like it suddenly weighed too much. His jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Not yet. General Anthony Reeves kept walking, slow, deliberate steps, like someone trained to move under fire without ever breaking formation. His medals caught the fading sunlight, glinting with the kind of weight no badge could overshadow. Marcus turned slightly, just enough to see his father's face. It wasn't anger he saw. It was something colder, something deeper. Not fury, but disappointment. Not just at the officer, at the world, at the fact that even now, in uniform, his son wasn't safe walking down a street. "Sir," the officer finally said, voice trying to find its footing. "I was just—" "You were just what?" General Reeves cut in, calm but sharp as broken glass. Detaining my son? Searching him? For what exactly? The officer hesitated. We had a call about a suspicious person walking through the area. Description matched. I was just doing my job. The general stopped 3 feet from him and looked the man dead in the eyes. Your job. Tell me, officer, did this suspicious person include anything about a school backpack, a math textbook, or did you just see a young black boy and assume he didn't belong? The officer opened his mouth, but nothing came out. General Reeves didn't need a confession. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. You put your hands on my son. You searched him, humiliated him, in public, with no probable cause. You didn't ask questions. You didn't de-escalate. You acted on instinct, and your instinct said, black equals danger. The silence that followed was unbearable. The officer shifted uncomfortably, clearly realizing the weight of the man in front of him was not just military, but moral. I didn't mean... Yes, you did, the general said, voice like steel. That's the problem. You meant every word, every action, because this is how you see us, not just him, us. A few more people had gathered now, quietly watching from a distance, pretending not to listen, but unable to look away. Marcus stood still, heart pounding, wishing the ground would swallow him up, but also unwilling to move. For once, he wasn't the one trying to disappear. The officer cleared his throat. I understand you're upset. Upset? The general stepped closer. I have given 3 decades of my life to this country. I have led men into war. I have watched friends die under my command. And I come home to find my son being treated like a criminal in the neighborhood I pay taxes to protect. You don't get to tell me what I should feel. The officer looked like he wanted to vanish. If I may, sir. You may not. The general's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. You will file a report. You will include every detail. And you will know this. I will be watching. My son's name is Marcus Elijah Reeves. Don't forget it. He turned to Marcus then, placing a firm hand on his shoulder. Let's go. Marcus walked with him, slowly, every muscle still vibrating from what had almost happened. As they moved away, he glanced back only once, just in time to see the officer lowering his eyes, shamed, but still not understanding. Because the truth wasn't in what had just been said. The truth was this. If Marcus's father hadn't shown up in uniform, the story might have ended differently. And both of them knew it. The walk back to their house was silent, save for the sound of their footsteps on the cracked sidewalk. Marcus trailing just behind his father. He couldn't help but replay every moment, every word, over and over in his head, trying to make sense of it all. The officer's words, the coldness in his voice when he'd called him suspicious, the way his body language shifted as soon as he saw Marcus was with a man in uniform, the hesitation, the fear that washed over the officer's face when his father showed up. It was as if his presence was enough to remind the officer that the world was not as simple as good and bad people. His father, the general, had stood as a reminder that there were people who were untouchable, people who held power, who could not be intimidated, who could demand respect even in the face of this kind of injustice. But what about Marcus? What if his father hadn't come? What if he'd been alone? Marcus shuddered, trying to push the thought out of his mind. His father's words echoed in his ears, the disappointment and pain lacing through his voice. But he could not ignore the truth. We have to live differently, Marcus. You'll always have to navigate this world in a way that they never will. His father didn't say it with anger. It wasn't even a lesson. It was a statement of fact. His father had been trying to protect him, but the way he said it made Marcus feel smaller, more vulnerable. There was no protection, not really, just awareness. Just the constant knowledge that no matter how hard you try, the world will always see you differently. It had always been this way, for his father too. But Marcus had never thought about it until now, not in the same way, and maybe that's what bothered him the most, that his father had to prepare him for something that Marcus had never fully understood, something that felt too heavy for someone his age to bear. He wanted to speak, to ask his father why it had to be this way, why it felt like the entire world had been designed to keep people like him in their place. But the words stuck in his throat. His father had seen it all. His father had lived it. What could Marcus possibly say that would change anything? When they reached the house, his father stood still at the front door, just a little longer than usual, as if he was still processing the same thoughts Marcus had been. He turned to Marcus, his face softer now, but the weight of their earlier conversation still hung between them. "You need to understand, son," he began, his voice quieter, "that this is not an isolated incident. It's not just a bad officer or a single racist moment. This is the world we live in. I've spent years trying to protect you from this reality, but it's time you understood." "I don't want to understand it," Marcus muttered, his voice barely audible. "You don't have a choice." His father's words cut through him, sharper than they should have been. His heart sank, not just from the truth of what his father was saying, but from the realization that this was the life he had ahead of him. No matter how hard he tried, no matter how good he was, how smart he was, his skin would always be the first thing people saw. He'd never be enough to overcome it. "You're strong, Marcus," his father said, his hand on his shoulder, his voice steadier now. "And that's why I need you to learn how to handle this, how to move through it, how to survive it. You've got to be better. You've got to be stronger. That's how we keep going." Marcus nodded, but it felt like the weight of the world was on him. The thought that he would have to be better every single day just to survive in this world, just because of the way he looked, made his stomach turn. It wasn't fair. He didn't want to be better. He wanted to be normal. He wanted to be seen as just another kid, walking down the street with no fear, no expectations. He didn't want to have to live in the shadow of something he couldn't change. Inside the house, the tension didn't let up. His mother was sitting at the kitchen table when they walked in, her face a picture of worry. The moment she saw them, her eyes flicked from Marcus to his father, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "What happened?" she asked, her voice tight. General Reeves took a breath before speaking. "Nothing. Just a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding," she repeated, her brow furrowing. "What kind of misunderstanding?" "A man was just doing his job," the general said, avoiding her gaze. "I handled it." But the lie felt heavy in the room. Marcus knew his mother could tell. He knew she saw the tension in his father's posture, the way his words were wrapped in hesitation. She knew better than anyone that nothing about this situation had been nothing or a misunderstanding. And yet, even she didn't know how to address it. "You handled it?" she asked. "How?" "I spoke to the officer," General Reeves said, his voice quiet now. "It's over. We don't need to talk about it." "We need to talk about it," his mother insisted, standing up, her voice rising. "Marcus, what happened?" Marcus remained silent. He didn't know what to say. His mother turned to him, her eyes searching for something he couldn't offer. She could see it on his face, the way he was trying to piece everything together. The confusion, the hurt. "It wasn't just a misunderstanding," she said softly, her tone changing. "You know that, right?" Marcus nodded, finally. He knew. He had seen it, felt it, today in the officer's eyes, in the way the officer had looked at him. He didn't need his mother to say it. He didn't need anyone to say it. He already knew. "We don't live in a world where you can just walk down the street without someone judging you," she continued, her voice thick with emotion. "But you've got your father's strength. You're going to have to use it, every day, even when it's hard, even when it feels impossible." Marcus didn't answer. What could he say? He felt lost. The weight of everything had crashed down on him, harder than anything he had ever experienced. He wanted to scream. He wanted to break something, but all he could do was stand there, feeling the walls closing in around him. "We're with you," his father said, finally breaking the silence. "Always." But Marcus wasn't so sure anymore. The truth felt heavier now, like an anchor. The idea that this was his life, his reality, was something he didn't want to accept. He didn't want to be this strong. He didn't want to have to fight every day just to be seen as human. But in that moment, as the night wore on, he realized something painful. He would have no choice. He would have to fight. And he wasn't sure how, but he knew he would. The next few days passed in a haze for Marcus. the weight of the previous encounter with the officer lingering like a phantom. He couldn't shake the feeling of the officer's hands on his backpack, the coldness in his eyes when he looked at Marcus, as if he were nothing more than a problem to be solved. The officer had never asked him a single question that mattered, only questions meant to diminish, to remind him of his place. Why are you here? What are you doing? What's in that bag? The world Marcus had once walked through with the casual ease of a teenager was now a place of suspicion and unease. No longer was he just a kid passing through a neighborhood. To everyone who had witnessed the scene, he was a threat, a suspicious one. And the worst part, he could feel it in the air every time he stepped outside. The looks, the whispers, the cameras. They didn't see him as a person anymore. They saw his skin first, and that was all they needed to know. It was the last straw for Marcus when he realized that, for all his father's strength, for all the pride he had in his military career, nothing had changed. His father couldn't change the way the world saw them. No one could, not even his mother, who had worked tirelessly, sacrificed everything to give Marcus a chance at a life outside the constraints of his neighborhood. She had warned him, had told him time and again how important it was to keep his head low, to stay out of trouble. But none of that had mattered in the face of that officer. None of it. When he got home that evening, he could see the signs of the tension between his parents, the quiet exchanges of glances, the brief moments where they would stop talking when he entered the room. They weren't fighting. No, that would have been easier to handle. But it was clear. Something had shifted. Something had been broken. His father was still distant, but it wasn't the kind of distance that came with being busy. No, his father was emotionally withdrawn, and Marcus understood. It wasn't just about the encounter with the officer. It was about something deeper, something they hadn't been able to talk about yet. His father had spent his life fighting for justice, for the dignity of his people, and now here was his son, just a kid, being dehumanized in the very streets they paid taxes to protect. It was a loss that was hard to put into words and even harder to carry. The anger began to boil up inside Marcus, not the kind of anger that came from frustration, but the kind that burned deep, the kind that left no room for logic, no room for understanding. It was the kind of anger that made him want to lash out, to scream at the world that had tried so hard to break him, the world that had tried to break his father. It felt suffocating. It was that Friday night when everything finally came to a head. Marcus had walked home from school, still replaying the images of the officer's face, the words from his father, his mother's quiet warnings. As he passed the park where he always cut through, he saw a group of kids standing by the swings. At first, he didn't recognize them. They were older, maybe 16 or 17, kids he'd never seen before, hanging out by the basketball court, their laughter ringing out into the cool evening air. For a moment, Marcus considered walking the long way around, but something inside him snapped. He wasn't going to be afraid anymore. He wasn't going to let them make him feel small. So, he walked through the park, as if nothing had changed. But as soon as he stepped onto the gravel path that led to the street, he felt it. The eyes, the stares. It was as if he had crossed into enemy territory. The group of older kids, who had been laughing just moments before, now stopped talking and turned to face him. Their eyes, cold and predatory, followed his every step. "Hey, what's up, kid?" one of them called out. Marcus didn't respond. He kept walking, his shoulders stiff, his hands clenched at his sides. He could feel the tension in the air, the threat hanging over him. The kid didn't stop. "You think you can just walk through here like you own the place?" the boy asked, his voice laced with mockery. Marcus kept walking, faster now, but the group was moving toward him. They weren't laughing anymore. Their faces were hard, their eyes filled with something Marcus couldn't place, a mix of entitlement, malice, and something else. "Didn't you hear me?" the boy said, now blocking his path. "You think you're too good for this part of town? You think you don't belong?" Marcus looked up, meeting his gaze for the first time. He was taller than the kid, stronger. He knew that, but there was no way out of this. There was no easy escape. "I'm not in the mood for this," Marcus muttered, trying to push past him. But the boy stepped forward, shoving him back, harder this time. "You don't get to just walk away, man. We don't like your kind around here. You think this park's for people like you?" A low laugh spread across the group. A couple of others stepped forward, circling him. Marcus felt his heart race, his breathing shallow. He knew what this was. It wasn't just a fight. It was humiliation. It was about making him feel small, about reminding him where he stood in the world. "What's wrong, tough guy? You don't talk so much now, huh?" The boy's taunt came, sharp and vicious. Marcus wanted to fight back, to shout, to punch the kid in the face and make them all see how wrong they were, how ridiculous they were. But there was something inside him that stopped him. He remembered his father's voice. Don't let them win. He remembered his mother's warnings about getting into trouble, about how the world didn't give second chances to people like him. He wanted to run, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. Not here, not in this world. The boy smirked, and Marcus knew the moment that his control was slipping. He couldn't take it anymore. But just as he stepped forward, fists clenched, ready to break whatever restraint he had left, something unexpected happened. "Hey!" A voice rang out from across the park, a deep, authoritative voice. It wasn't just a shout, it was a command. The group of kids froze, turning toward the sound. It was a voice they knew, one that carried weight, one that couldn't be ignored. It was Marcus's father. General Reeves strode toward them, his posture commanding. The boys didn't move. They knew who he was. They knew the weight his name carried, even if they had never seen him before. His uniform, his demeanor, his presence, they all combined to make him an undeniable force. "What's going on here?" The general's voice was low, but there was no mistaking the authority in it. His eyes flicked from the group of kids to Marcus, his expression unreadable. "Marcus, are you okay?" For a moment, Marcus didn't know what to say. He was caught between anger, fear, and a strange sense of relief. His father was here, yes, but it wasn't supposed to be this way. It shouldn't have been this way. He should have been able to walk home, to pass through a park, without this. "I'm fine, Dad," Marcus said, his voice tight. The boys didn't say a word. They just stood there, eyes lowered, as if they were facing something far more terrifying than just another fight. Without a word, the general motioned for Marcus to follow him. They didn't need to say anything more. As they left the park, Marcus's father spoke, his voice still calm but filled with an undercurrent of something darker. "You never stop fighting, son. But the worst thing you can do is let them see you break. Do you understand that?" Marcus nodded, but his chest still felt tight. The fight wasn't over. It would never be. But his father had given him something, an understanding of the strength that came not from fighting, but from surviving. "Let's go home," his father said. "We'll talk when we get there." As they walked away, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that the world had just shown him something far more brutal than any fight. The true cost of surviving this world, the cost of living with eyes always on you, was a price he would have to pay every day. The following weeks were a blur for Marcus. The events in the park and the conversation with his father had left a lingering tension in the air, one that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Every glance, every stare felt charged with the weight of something unspoken. He had hoped that things would settle down once they returned to the safety of home. But the truth was that he couldn't shake the sense of vulnerability. The world outside felt like a powder keg, waiting to explode with the slightest spark. And Marcus could feel the pressure building inside him with each passing day. His father's stern advice echoed in his mind. Don't let them win. It was the mantra that kept him grounded, but every time he walked through the doors of his school or down the street, he felt the weight of the world on his shoulders, heavier than ever. Every room he entered seemed to have its eyes on him, judging him, watching him like a specimen under a microscope. It wasn't just the encounters with strangers in the park or the cops that had started to gnaw at him. It was the things that happened in the quieter corners of his life, the things he couldn't put his finger on, the things that left him feeling small and insignificant. It was the way people looked at him when he spoke, like they were waiting for him to make a mistake. The way teachers would call on him less often than his classmates, as if they didn't trust his intelligence. The dismissive tone in the voices of some of the other kids when they talked about him, the offhand comments made in the hallways, in the classrooms, as though he didn't belong. But it wasn't just the kids at school who made it hard. The adults, the ones who should have known better, had begun to reveal their true colours in ways that Marcus hadn't expected. His mum, who worked in a corporate office, had warned him about the subtle ways racism crept into daily life, but he hadn't really understood until now. Now, he could see it all around him. He could feel it. It was in the way the receptionist at his mum's office smiled at him, but with an undertone that screamed discomfort. It was in the way his father's colleagues greeted him, warmly, on the surface, but with a slight hesitation, as if unsure how to interact with him, like he was an anomaly, something out of place. It was in the quiet, uncomfortable pauses when he entered a room full of strangers. Everyone wanted to acknowledge him, but only just enough to avoid making him feel invisible. But what really broke him was that one phone call. It came late one evening, just as Marcus was sitting down to do his homework. His mother had just finished dinner, her face tired from a long day at work. She had set down her glass of water when the phone rang, and as she answered, her expression shifted. It wasn't the kind of change that happened when you received bad news. No, it was deeper, more insidious. It was the look of someone who had seen something they could never unsee. A realization that had settled into her bones. She didn't hang up the phone immediately, but Marcus could tell that whatever she was hearing, it wasn't good. He could see the way her hand clenched around the receiver, the way her eyes narrowed. "Is this about Marcus?" she said, her voice tight. There was no greeting, no formalities, just a cold recognition of the situation at hand. It was the kind of phone call every parent feared. Marcus's stomach twisted. He knew exactly what it was. He had been the one to walk through the park. He had been the one to confront the group of boys. He had felt something shift in him that day, something darker. And now, whatever it was, whatever had been set into motion, was coming to a head. "Mum?" he asked, standing up slowly, his heartbeat pounding in his ears. "What's going on?" His mother didn't answer at first. She was listening intently to the voice on the other end, her face unreadable. Her eyes flicked to him briefly, filled with something he couldn't quite understand. Was it worry? Was it anger? The phone call had already altered something between them, something unsaid that made the air feel thick, almost suffocating. Then she hung up and turned to him, her face pale. "It's the principal's office," she said quietly. "There's been an incident at school. Some of the other students, they reported you. They said you were being aggressive." "Aggressive?" Marcus repeated, his voice trembling with confusion and a rising sense of dread. "I don't know what they're talking about. I didn't do anything." His mother's eyes softened for a moment, but the weariness in them remained. "I know, Marcus, but the report said you were involved in a confrontation with a few other students and it got out of hand." "Who? What are they saying?" Marcus could feel the anger beginning to burn in his chest again, a familiar sensation that was all too easy to summon these days. He couldn't believe it. He hadn't started anything. He'd just defended himself, just like he had done his whole life, just like his father had taught him. His mother shook her head slowly. "It doesn't matter what happened, Marcus. What matters is how it's being seen. They're saying you were too aggressive, that you escalated the situation. They're questioning your behavior." Marcus felt his world tilt. He had been doing his best to hold it together. He had been trying to keep his cool, trying to stay out of trouble, to avoid giving anyone a reason to make him the problem. But now, here it was, the moment he had been dreading. "They don't care," he whispered, shaking his head. "They don't care about the truth. They care about the story they can sell. They care about me being the problem. The black kid who gets violent." His mother didn't respond right away, but Marcus could see the resignation on her face. This was exactly what she had been trying to protect him from. This was exactly why she had worked so hard to shelter him, to make sure he had every opportunity to succeed. But all that work, all that care, couldn't change the fact that the world didn't see him as she did. The world didn't see him as a kid with potential, with ambition. The world saw his skin first, and it would always be that way. The next day, Marcus's mother took him to the principal's office. The tension was unbearable. As they entered the principal's office, Marcus felt the weight of the gaze from the receptionist, someone who had never given him a second glance before. Now, her eyes were scrutinizing him, as if trying to determine if he was worth the time. The door opened, and the principal, Mr. Walker, greeted them with a tight smile. "Marcus, I'm glad you could make it, Mr. Walker said, though his voice lacked the warmth that had once seemed so genuine. He gestured to a chair. "Please, sit down. We need to talk." Marcus sat, but he wasn't sure he could stand the suffocating silence. His mother sat beside him, her arms crossed, her jaw tight. She wasn't saying much, but the quiet anger in her was more telling than any words could be. "I've heard about the incident yesterday, Mr. Walker continued, his gaze shifting between Marcus and his mother. "The reports are troubling, the way the situation was handled. We received complaints from several students. They claim you were being physical, aggressive." Marcus's mother's eyes narrowed. "I don't understand. Marcus doesn't get aggressive unless he's being provoked." Mr. Walker's expression softened, but the underlying judgment remained. "I understand that, but we also have to consider the perception. There are students who feel threatened by your son's presence." Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. It wasn't just about what happened in the park. It was happening here too. The whispers, the stares, the way people feared him for being black. He wasn't sure if they even realized how deeply it hurt, how much it weighed on him. "I didn't do anything wrong," Marcus said quietly, his voice cracking as he spoke. "I was just standing up for myself. I didn't start anything." Mr. Walker's face remained neutral. "Marcus, it's not about who started what. It's about the way it's being perceived. And unfortunately, right now, the perception is that you're a threat." Marcus's mother stood up. "That's the problem, isn't it? You're not looking at what really happened. You're looking at the story you want to tell. The story that makes him out to be dangerous." Her voice was shaking now, but she wasn't backing down. "My son is not a threat. He is not a danger. You're treating him like one because of the color of his skin, and that is the truth." There was a long pause. Mr. Walker didn't speak. He just looked at them, his expression unreadable. "I'm sorry," he said finally, "but we'll have to take this up with the school board. This situation isn't something I can fix on my own." Marcus sat back, stunned. His mother looked defeated, her shoulders sagging. The weight of it all crashed down on him like a wave. This wasn't just about one incident. This wasn't about the fight in the park. This was about a system that saw him as a problem before he even spoke. It was about a world that judged him for the color of his skin and never gave him the chance to be anything else. And as he sat there, in that sterile office, Marcus realized something he'd never truly understood before. He couldn't win. Not in the way they wanted him to. Not in the way they wanted to see him. But maybe, just maybe, he didn't have to. Maybe, just maybe, he could survive. Even if the world tried to break him. And that was the first step. The days after the meeting in the principal's office stretched on like a never-ending fog. Marcus walked through his high school halls with a heavy heart, the weight of everyone's eyes constantly on him. He could feel it every time he passed someone, every time he bumped into a classmate in the hall. He didn't need to look to know they were staring. He could feel the subtle shift in the air, the way the crowd of students seemed to part just a little wider when he walked by. It wasn't the kind of space made for breathing. It was the space of suspicion, of a world where his every move was being analyzed. He had become the center of attention for all the wrong reasons, and it was a spotlight he couldn't escape from. The whispers followed him. "Did you hear? He's the one who got into that fight. He's trouble. He's always been trouble." The words were like daggers, cutting into him, stabbing at the very foundation of who he was. The worst part wasn't the insults, though. It was the quiet, the silence that came from those who didn't speak. The friends who turned their backs, the people who suddenly avoided him in the hallways, pretending not to notice his presence. They didn't need to say anything. Their avoidance spoke volumes. The way they would cross the street to avoid walking near him. The way they would look away when he tried to make eye contact. Marcus started to wonder if he had become invisible, not in the way he wanted, disappearing into the background, but in the way that said he wasn't worth noticing. He was the kid who had been aggressive, who had caused trouble, and in a world built on white fragility and comfort, that meant he no longer had the right to exist freely. He no longer had the right to walk through these halls without being a target. At home, the tension hadn't lifted either. His mother was quieter these days, her face pale from the late nights she spent on the phone with the school, trying to clear his name, trying to make sense of the words that were being said behind closed doors. His father, too, was distant, tired, like the weight of everything he had worked for had suddenly crumbled under the pressure of his son's experience. General Reeves had always taught Marcus to hold his head high, to never back down in the face of adversity. But even he couldn't protect his son from the silent poison that flowed through society, from the prejudices that ran deep, buried under layers of politeness and well-meaning smiles. It wasn't long before Marcus realized that the battle wasn't just happening in the hallways of his school or at the dinner table. It was happening in his own mind, too. He was constantly battling with himself, wondering if he had done something wrong, wondering if there was something about him that made him deserve to be treated this way. The shame festered, even as he tried to push it away. His father had told him not to let them win, but how could he not? Every glance, every whisper, felt like a tiny defeat. The very act of surviving in this world was a daily fight, one he wasn't sure he could keep winning. One particular afternoon, Marcus found himself sitting alone in the school courtyard, watching the other students as they went about their day. He could see them laughing, talking, enjoying their afternoon like nothing was wrong, and yet everything was wrong. Nothing about his reality felt normal anymore. His world had shifted, and he couldn't find his footing. Then, as he sat there, lost in his thoughts, he saw them. The group of boys who had harassed him in the park. They were standing by the basketball court, their eyes fixed on him. As soon as Marcus noticed them, they started to walk in his direction. His heart began to race again, the familiar feeling of dread creeping up his spine. He stood up quickly, but before he could move, one of the boys, Kyle, the one who had pushed him earlier, called out to him. "Hey Marcus," Kyle said, his voice dripping with false cheer. "We need to talk." Marcus froze, his mind racing. He knew exactly what this was. This was another attempt to humiliate him, to remind him of his place. They had seen him as weak, as an outsider, and now they were coming for him, trying to break him in ways that couldn't be seen. Just subtle digs, just enough to make him feel small. "I don't want any trouble," Marcus said, his voice steady but his insides twisted with nerves. "Trouble?" Kyle grinned, his face twisted with amusement. "You think this is trouble? Nah, man. We just want to make sure you're okay. You know, after what happened." Marcus's stomach turned. He could feel the others closing in around him, their laughter low and mocking, their eyes calculating. "We just think it's funny," Kyle continued, leaning in a little too close. "How you act all tough, like you're some big deal. But we both know how it goes. You don't belong here, Marcus. You don't belong in our world." The words hit harder than Marcus had expected. They weren't just mocking him. They were claiming territory, reinforcing the idea that he was an outsider, that he was less than them. It was the same message that had followed him all his life, and it wasn't just about him. It was about every black kid who had been treated the same way. It was about every person of color who had ever been forced to feel like they didn't belong, who had been made to feel like their mere presence was a threat to the comfort of others. Marcus took a step back, his fists clenched, ready to explode. But before he could react, he felt a hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, don't!" came a voice, low and calm. It was his father. General Reeves stepped forward, standing between Marcus and the group of boys. His posture was firm, unyielding, and the difference in size between him and the boys was undeniable. The group immediately stepped back, their faces betraying the unease they now felt in the presence of someone who was clearly not intimidated by them. "Leave him alone," General Reeves said, his voice like gravel, deep and unshakable. "You've said enough." Kyle, clearly thrown off by the sudden arrival of Marcus's father, tried to compose himself. "What's your problem, man?" he said, trying to sound tough. "He's the one who started it." "No," Marcus's father replied, his voice cold, the authority in it impossible to ignore. "You started it, and I'm done listening to the excuses. If you want to keep acting like you own this place, you're going to learn what happens when you try to take away someone else's dignity." The boys didn't say a word. They stood there, too stunned to move, as General Reeves took a step toward them, his presence commanding. "You have two choices," he said, his voice low, dangerous. "You can walk away now, and I'll make sure you never bother my son again. Or you can keep going down this path and find out what happens when you push someone who has nothing left to lose." For a moment, there was silence. Then, Kyle's face twisted into a sneer, but he didn't say anything. He turned around, motioning for the others to follow, and they all walked away without another word. Marcus's heart was pounding. His father turned to him, his eyes filled with something softer now. Pride, concern, a mix of emotions that Marcus couldn't fully understand. "You don't have to prove anything to them," his father said. "You don't have to fight every battle. You just have to survive, Marcus. And know that I'll always be here to make sure they never take your dignity from you." Marcus nodded, the weight of his father's words sinking in. But even as he tried to accept them, he couldn't shake the feeling that the war wasn't over. Not yet. The world outside still saw him as a problem to be fixed, as someone who didn't belong. But now, for the first time, he understood that the battle wasn't about winning. It was about surviving. It was about holding on to who he was, no matter what they tried to make him feel. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was all he could ever do. But it was enough to keep going. The world seemed to collapse in on Marcus in a way he never expected. After the confrontation with the boys in the park, after the harsh words from his classmates and the principal, after the silent, suffocating presence of racism that followed him everywhere, Marcus began to feel like he was losing himself. Every inch of his body felt like it was under scrutiny. Every word that escaped his mouth, every step he took, was dissected in ways he could never control. He could never be just Marcus anymore. He would always be the black kid, the one who didn't belong, the one who was a threat. It didn't matter what his grades were. It didn't matter how hard he tried. He was being seen for something he could never change. His father's words echoed in his mind every day. "You don't have to prove anything to them." But Marcus was starting to wonder if he had any other choice. The world wasn't just asking him to prove something. It was demanding that he disappear. It demanded that he make himself smaller, quieter, less visible, and to blend in with the background in a way that would never make anyone uncomfortable. But how could he do that? How could he erase who he was, what he stood for, just to fit into a world that never cared enough to see him? That Friday afternoon, Marcus sat alone in his room, the sunlight streaming through his window, but failing to warm him. He stared at the blank wall in front of him, his thoughts swirling around him like a storm. His mind kept returning to the incident at the park, the way the boys had circled him like vultures, mocking him, belittling him, reducing him to nothing more than an outsider. He couldn't shake the sound of their laughter, the way they had tried to strip him of his humanity with their words. He could still feel the humiliation, like a heavy weight pressing down on his chest, suffocating him. His phone buzzed, snapping him out of his thoughts. He looked at the screen and saw a text from his friend Darnell. They had been close since middle school, and although Darnell didn't fully understand what Marcus was going through, he had always been there for him. The text read, "Yo, you good? Heard what happened. Don't let them get to you, man. You know who you are." Marcus stared at the message, feeling both comforted and frustrated. He did know who he was. He wasn't just the kid who had been harassed at the park, or the kid the principal thought was trouble. But in moments like this, when the world seemed to have decided who he was for him, he didn't feel like he knew anything anymore. He typed back, "Yeah, I'm fine. Just tired of all this." He didn't get a reply. Darnell probably figured he was just in one of those moods, the ones where Marcus didn't want to talk. The truth was, Marcus didn't know what he wanted to say anymore. He was tired of explaining himself, of trying to make people understand that he was just trying to exist in a world that wouldn't let him. He didn't owe anyone an explanation for his existence. Yet here he was, constantly justifying his every move. Marcus stood up from his bed and walked to the mirror, staring at his reflection for a long time. He didn't recognize the person looking back at him. The face staring at him was still his, still the same. But it was like he was looking at someone else, someone who had been shaped by the harsh world around him. He saw the lines of stress around his eyes, the tightness in his jaw, the way his shoulders were always hunched, as if bracing for the next blow. He didn't want to carry that weight anymore. He didn't want to walk through life with the burden of expectations and assumptions weighing him down. He didn't want to be invisible, but he also didn't want to be a target. His phone buzzed again, pulling him out of his thoughts. This time, it was a notification from the school. He opened it, and his heart sank as he read the message. Due to recent events, Marcus Reeves has been placed on probation. Further incidents will result in disciplinary action. He blinked, reading the message again, as if his eyes might be playing tricks on him. How was this happening? How could they do this to him? He had been doing everything they asked of him, staying quiet, keeping his head down, trying to be invisible. And yet, here it was, another label, another sentence that told him he was a problem. The message didn't even explain the incident, didn't even give him a chance to defend himself. It was just a verdict, a reminder of his place. Marcus felt the ground beneath him tilt as anger and frustration surged through him, hot and fast. He was being punished for something he didn't even do. His hands shook with the fury that boiled inside him. He wanted to throw his phone across the room, to scream until his voice cracked, to make someone see him, see the pain they were causing. But the walls in his house felt so suffocating. Everything about this world felt suffocating. No matter how much he fought, no matter how much he tried to prove himself, he was still just a kid in a broken system that would never truly see him as equal. His father came into the room then, standing in the doorway, his presence commanding but gentle. He could see the tension in Marcus's posture, the way his fists were clenched at his sides. Without a word, General Reeves walked over and placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus didn't look up. His father's hand was warm, but it didn't comfort him. Not now. "I saw the message," his father said quietly. "You're not alone in this." Marcus turned to face him, his eyes burning with frustration. "They're not listening, Dad. I don't know what I'm supposed to do anymore. It doesn't matter what I do, how hard I try. They see me as the problem, as the threat, and nothing I do will ever change that." General Reeves sighed deeply, his face hardening as he processed his son's words. He could see it in Marcus's eyes. The raw pain of a young man who had been asked to carry a burden far too heavy for his age. A burden of a world that would never see him as an individual, but as a stereotype. A world that would always remind him of his skin color, of the way he was born, of the systems designed to keep him down. "It's not your fault, son," his father said, his voice soft but steady. "The system is broken, and it's not going to fix itself overnight. But you're stronger than you think, and we'll face this together." Marcus didn't know how much longer he could hold on. He wanted to believe his father, wanted to trust that this was just another obstacle, another hurdle to overcome. But the truth was, the walls were closing in. Every day, it felt like the world was getting smaller, tighter, as if he were suffocating under the weight of the expectations that everyone had placed on him. The anger didn't leave him. It simmered beneath the surface, gnawing at him, a constant reminder of the injustice he was being forced to endure. But that night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, something inside him shifted. It wasn't the peace of resolution or the calm of acceptance. It was the resolve of a boy who had had enough. He didn't know what was coming next, didn't know how he would navigate the world that had made him feel so small, so insignificant. But one thing was certain: he was done trying to disappear. In that moment, Marcus realized that he wasn't just surviving anymore. He was learning how to fight. And no matter what the world threw at him, no matter how hard it got, he would stand. He would survive. And maybe, just maybe, he would make them see him for who he truly was. The world had underestimated him. They thought he would break. But Marcus was just getting started. And the fight, the real fight, had only just begun. The days that followed felt different for Marcus. It was as if something had clicked inside him, an understanding that his fight was not just against a few individual prejudices or isolated incidents, but against an entire system built to see him as less. Every step he took, every glance he received, was no longer something to fear. It was something to challenge. He wasn't going to let them break him, not anymore. But the world hadn't changed. The whispers still followed him down the hallways of school. He still felt the cold stares and judgment from the students who avoided him like he was contagious, like he was dangerous simply because of the color of his skin. It was harder now, though. Now that he had seen through it all. Now that he understood the game being played. He wasn't playing by their rules anymore. He wasn't playing by anyone's rules. That Friday afternoon, a week after the principal's meeting and the growing tension at school, Marcus stood outside by the flagpole during lunch, leaning against it as he watched the students laughing and talking in their groups. It seemed surreal now. Their laughter felt like a distant echo, like it belonged to a world he no longer fit into. He had once been a part of that world, where everything was simple, where everything felt normal. But now, everything had changed. He was just about to turn and walk to the steps to sit down when he saw them. The same group of boys from the park, the ones who had humiliated him, the ones who had taunted him just for existing in their space. Kyle was at the front again, his posture cocky, his smirk unmistakable. The moment Marcus made eye contact with him, a ripple of silence passed over the group. They knew what was coming. "Hey, look who it is!" Kyle called out, his voice loud enough for the others to hear. "The tough guy from the park. You still feel like a big man, Marcus?" Marcus felt his stomach churn with a mix of anger and disgust. He had been prepared for this, but now that it was happening, he didn't know what to say. He could feel the eyes of other students turning toward him, some curious, others amused. It wasn't just about Kyle and his crew anymore. It was about the whole damn school, the whole world watching. He was a spectacle now. He was the freak show. "I'm not here for you, Kyle," Marcus said, his voice steady, but his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "So just go back to your game and leave me alone." "Oh, we're not done yet," Kyle sneered, stepping closer. His friends flanked him, moving in on Marcus, a circle of intimidation closing in around him. They were making a scene, and they knew it. The stares from the other students grew more intense. No one was stepping in. No one was trying to stop it. This was what they had all been waiting for, wasn't it? To see how far Marcus would bend, to see if he would back down. "You think you're better than us now, don't you?" Kyle said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Just because your dad wears a uniform doesn't mean you get to walk around here like you own it. This isn't your world, Marcus." Something inside Marcus snapped. He had endured this for too long. He had let people like Kyle tear him down, piece by piece, and he was done. Done with letting people walk all over him. Done with trying to fit into a world that would never accept him for who he was. The pressure of it all, the bullying, the humiliation, the endless disrespect had been building for far too long, and it was all coming to a head now. "No!" Marcus's voice rang out, loud and clear, cutting through the silence. "You don't get to tell me where I belong anymore. You don't get to decide that for me. I'm done letting people like you walk over me. I'm done being your target." His fists were shaking at his sides, but he didn't care anymore. He was finally standing up. The group of boys paused. Kyle's smirk faltered slightly, the slightest flicker of surprise in his eyes. For the first time, he didn't have the upper hand. Marcus saw it in the way his eyes widened just a little. He hadn't expected this. He hadn't expected Marcus to fight back. "You think you're tough?" Kyle scoffed. But it was different this time. The edge in his voice wasn't as sharp as it had been before. "You think this is going to change anything?" Marcus stood taller. "Yeah, it will. Because I'm not scared of you anymore. I'm not scared of anyone like you. You don't own this school. You don't own this world." His voice grew stronger with every word. "You only think you do because no one's ever called you out. Well, I'm calling you out. You and every single person who's ever looked at me and decided I don't belong here." The group of boys shifted uncomfortably. There was no laughter now, no mocking, just silence. And in that silence, Marcus realized something he had never fully understood before. His power wasn't in his fists. It wasn't in the anger or the frustration he had been holding on to for so long. It was in his voice, in his refusal to back down, in his willingness to stand, no matter what. Kyle didn't know how to respond. He was used to having the power to tear people down, to make them feel small. But Marcus wasn't small. He wasn't going to shrink for anyone. And in that moment, he saw it in Kyle's eyes, a flicker of doubt, a crack in his confidence. The thing he had used to keep Marcus in his place had finally broken. "You don't belong here," Kyle muttered, but there was no conviction in his words. He wasn't sure anymore. He wasn't sure what Marcus was. The tension hung in the air, thick and oppressive. But Marcus didn't flinch. He didn't back down. And slowly, the group began to disperse. Kyle shot him one last venomous look, but there was no fight left in him. Without another word, he turned and walked away, the others following in his wake, their heads down, their posture defeated. The group had lost its power, and Marcus had gained something far more valuable: his dignity. The courtyard was still, quiet, but the eyes of the other students were on him now. Not with fear, not with disdain, but with something new. With respect. They had all been watching, waiting for him to break, waiting for him to show weakness. And when he didn't, when he stood his ground and refused to let them tear him apart, something shifted in the atmosphere. It wasn't a grand victory. It wasn't a fight won with fists. It was something much deeper, something unspoken, something that made the other students look at Marcus in a way they never had before. As he walked away, the weight that had been pressing on him for so long seemed to lighten. The fight wasn't over, he knew that. It would never be over. The world wouldn't change overnight, and there would always be people like Kyle, people who saw him as a threat simply because of the color of his skin. But Marcus wasn't afraid anymore. He had found his voice, and he wasn't going to let anyone silence it. For the first time in his life, Marcus felt like he could breathe again. Not because the world had changed, but because he had. He had learned that no matter how loud the world tried to shout him down, he had the power to speak louder, to stand taller, and to survive. And that was enough. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. We'd love to hear your thoughts on this story. What do you think about Marcus's journey? Have you ever experienced racism or witnessed it in your life? Your opinions are incredibly important to us, and we value each and every one of you. If you enjoyed this story, please consider subscribing and liking the video. Your support means a lot. Wishing you a wonderful day ahead. And if you're still with us, leave the phrase, "stand tall, speak louder," in the comments so we know you listened all the way to the end. Thank you for being part of this journey.